Hey, I'm Lukas, the CEO and one of the creators of vCluster. As CEO at LoftLabs, one of the creators of vCluster. And we're actually starting with the business value here, because my talk is about, your company decided to invest in GPUs. We heard AI is super important to the ecosystem right now. Lots of CTOs make that decision. I'm going to give you a very quick guide on hopefully how to make your CTO happy after you bought all of these GPUs. So, let's assume your CTO spent $8 million on 4 DGX nodes, so you got 32 H100s or something like that right now. That's pretty awesome. We can do AI now, right? Great. Well, not for you, because you're an infra. We're all Kubernetes people, so running LLMs on GPUs is typically not what we do. We don't get to do the fun part. We get these servers, and we have to do something with them now, right? So we have them in our data center now. And now what? How do we hand it out to folks? Well, here's the answer. You just, you have 4 nodes, create 2 clusters, you slap run AI on top of it, you hand it out to 2 teams, we're good. That's the talk. Now, obviously, this is Kubernetes. It's a little bit more complicated than this. So if you were to do it like this, first of all, you need some CPU nodes as well to run the control plane. I'd recommend maybe grabbing 3 for HA, resiliency, etc. If you're feeling lucky, just grab 1, slap it on there, right? But looking at our worker nodes, tenant A potentially is not utilizing these DGX nodes correctly, right? So they're underutilized. So $4 million of investment is not being utilized, not creating that business value, right? So ideally, you're not just buying, $8 million of GPUs and, we're close to Wall Street. I'm pretty sure the investments that most people make is more than $8 million right now in terms of GPUs and AI. So you really want to get the most out of this, and the value that these GPUs create is hopefully much greater, right? Let's say $40 million in value, $100 million in value, right? If you're not utilizing these GPUs and you're saying, okay, 40% of our potential is kind of taken up and running idle here, that's not great. What's also not great is, tenant 2 here is actually utilizing these GPUs pretty heavily. They could probably create value faster. They could probably create more value if they had more GPU access. But they don't, because they got 2 nodes. They're at the limit. And then what's even worse is, what about, tenants, 3, 4, and 5 here, right? You don't have anything for them. That's a big problem as well. So how about a shared cluster, right? We can just run essentially, one large run AI instance here, slap all of our CPUs in there. But that's also not ideal because you don't have any tenant isolation. If tenants want to do, serving of their models, right, they essentially, are restricted to what you are offering them in that cluster. And since they share a cluster, you can't give anyone the privilege to manage their own CRDs, deploy their own operators. They're very, very restricted in these clusters. And you're essentially the bottleneck. That's a big problem as well. One of the solutions here is to use vCluster. vCluster is an open source project that we started in 2021. It essentially creates fully fledged Kubernetes clusters that run inside a shared Kubernetes cluster. So you have this large multi-tenant cluster, but instead of handing out access to the API server of that cluster, you launch a vCluster. And a vCluster is really just a pod that exposes a Kubernetes control plane in a pod, right, an API server. You can expose it via, ingress, load balancer, you name it. And people now talk to this API instead of your actual, EKS, AKS, or whatever Kubernetes cluster or distro you're running. And they feel like, your tenants feel like they got a full-blown cluster. They can manage CRDs. You can make them cluster admin. But effectively, they're tied into individual namespaces in a shared multi-tenant cluster that allows you to share certain things, like run AI, for example, as a controller, and actually sync CRDs between, the virtual cluster etcd and the underlying cluster's, real etcd. And this doesn't just work with things like run AI. It obviously works for anything that runs on top of Kubernetes. So you can do this with Kubeflow, Volcano, any kind of operator you may want to share amongst tenants and improve utilization here. And besides vCluster, we're actually building a fully fledged stack of virtualization for the container native age. So there's also a tool called vNode that we announced at KubeCon Europe earlier this year in London, which will essentially isolate workloads on these shared nodes. Because, we got control plane isolation, we can give access to CRDs and, self-service namespace creation on all of this stuff in their virtual clusters, but you still have containers running on shared nodes now. And you do need to secure them and isolate them. That's what vNode helps you to do. It actually wraps these workloads in what we call virtual nodes so that you don't have to create VMs. A lot of folks that run GPUs, especially, don't want to introduce that VM layer. There's also a bunch of folks that want to move off of the VM layer, right? And what we just talked about doesn't just work for GPUs, it works for traditional CPU workloads as well. So, why are we, creating virtual machines today if our applications are already containerized? One of the big reasons is to form clusters, right? Let's say you have 2 beefy servers. How many clusters can you create? Well, not a lot. I would actually say not even one, right? So people traditionally start creating virtual machines, and then they form clusters out of them. But what if we just created one large cluster, put all of our CPU-based machines in there, go bare metal? The problem is tenancy. And what you can do with vCluster is you launch these virtual clusters and hand them out. That's a really nice tenancy model. And then you have vNode, but you can also use a bunch of other tools. There's like gvisor and other solutions out there. I think we're combining a pretty interesting approach here in vNode, so you should definitely check it out. I actually think it's a lot more secure than tools like gvisor. But use any of these tools to isolate workloads on these shared nodes, and you have a true cloud-native, container-native virtualization stack without introducing traditional hypervisors. Today, there's going to be a book signing with Mark Borstein, an author who has an entire chapter about vCluster. He's right over there. He's going to be at our vCluster booth. It's a big orange booth out there. So definitely check that out. It's at 12:15 during lunchtime. Definitely come to the booth if you want to chat with us. And my colleague Scott, saw him earlier as well. I'm not sure where he is. Oh, he's right there. He's going to have a talk about moving from VMs to bare metal. So you should definitely check that out as well. And if you want to connect with me, here's my LinkedIn. There's a great slide that has everything in there. So feel free to take a photo of this one. Thank you.